Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please be sure to give this video a like and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I am bringing you another episode of quick album reviews. I know it's been about a month since I've had some content, but you should expect to see some more in October. And as always, in October comes one of my favorite months, one of my favorite holidays, I should say, and that is Halloween. And on Halloween Day, as with last year, I will have a special video that is themed around the holiday. And it will be another ranking of a horror series. I'm not going to reveal what that is yet. You'll have to wait and see, but that is what will be happening on Halloween. But today, I do have a traditional quick album reviews segment. These have been doing very well on my channel, so thank you for the continued support on them. As long as they continue to do well, I'll keep on doing them because it's a very convenient way to talk about a lot of different music that I've been listening to in a shorter form. So let's not waste any more time and get started with the first album I'll be discussing on the list. We're going to get started with a duo that is a pop/synth pop band called Magdalena. It seems that they've gotten a little bit more popular this year, and I think for well-deserved reasons. I was a big fan of this band's debut album, Mercurial World. I thought it was very well done synth pop, doing some very cool variations of it. I think this band, which consists of Matt and Mika, is really talented. I think they've got a lot of stuff going for them, and I think this sophomore album of theirs, Imaginal Disc, only serves to prove that, because while I do really like their first album, this one is just a step above it in every way possible and is going to easily be one of my favorite albums of the year. I mean, just talk about an absolutely incredible slice of synth pop with some really delightful choices made here. This one takes the idea of concept album even further and uses the idea of how people want to change themselves to become the perfect version of themselves. And that can sometimes lead to disastrous consequences in trying to be so perfect that you ultimately lose who you really were in the first place. And the band takes this into a more digital sort of way, and they have the idea of someone inserting a disc into themselves to become the ideal version of themselves, almost like a virtual reality scenario in certain ways. There is just so much to praise about this album. Production-wise, this album sounds absolutely immaculate. It is one of the most beautiful sounding albums I've heard this year, as well as one of the most unique pop releases I've heard in quite some time. I mean, it just does so much good with the musical choices it makes, including how it incorporates synths and guitar work, and even bass is really well done. In a song like Image, for an example, I just really love the way they make sort of bizarre synth noises to get you into the vibe. There's so many other highlights on here as well. I love Killing Time. I think this one has some of the most groovy bass riffs on the album. It's just so awesome to listen to. Vampire in the Corner is an emotional masterpiece that I really like, where Mika talks about being an outcast in her own mind and that she feels like she's constantly in retreat mode. It's a very heart-wrenching song that I did enjoy quite a bit. That's My Floor is an absolute masterwork, easily one of the best songs on the album. I just love where this song progresses, and this one gets into the foreboding darkness of the album in a very strong way. Probably the best song on this album, and it's hard to say because there are so many good songs on this album, but Cry For Me has to be the best for me. This one exerts some real ABBA influences, which I think was purposeful. And it's like a dark ABBA song. It's so interesting, and I think really the only way for you to truly understand what that experience is like is to check out the song for yourself. From front to back, this album is pretty excellent. There's just not much complaints I have for it at all. I don't know, I don't even really think there's a song I dislike on here, or I can say I passionately would skip in future listens, because every song on this album is essential to the album's journey, and every single one has something interesting going on with it. So yeah, I'm going to be giving this album a very strong 4.5 out of 5 stars. It could move up to a 5 out of 5 with repeat listens, but what we have here is one of the best releases of the year. maybe even the best album of the year so far. Next up is the album Short and Sweet by Sabrina Carpenter, and much like the album title implies, I will keep this section of the short album reviews pretty short, because I don't have a crazy amount to say about this album, besides that I think it is a pretty solid pop release. It was not really super surprising to see her blow up this year, although what was more surprising was how much she blew up. I mean, it seemingly happened almost overnight, with Please, 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 I would say, was where it really exploded. Espresso was sort of the song that started her off and became the big hit it came to know to be eventually, but then our second single, Please, 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 was sort of the one that ultimately affirmed her popularity. And then the album came out and just went off the charts successful, and the rest is history. Now, I'm not going to say that this album is particularly mind-blowing for pop or anything. A lot of people have said that this is a better release than the likes of what, for an example, Olivia Rodrigo has released. Out of the newer pop stars that are blowing up right now, I would say that Sabrina Carpenter is the least interesting to me, but she's not bad by any means. And there is definitely some showcase of what she's capable of on here, and I'm excited to see where she brings that in the future. For example, Taste is a really fun single. I can see why this one has gotten so popular. I mean, the music video itself is pretty great. But I do like this one for being the most upbeat on the album and having some almost pop rock feels to it. I think that Please, Please, Please is a fine song. I do like the slight country influences on it, and the satirical tone that Sabrina uses in the song works well, although I wish it was pushed maybe even a little bit further. I also think that Bedkym, this one of course, is one that has become popular on TikTok, and I can see why, because I do think this one's very catchy, and it's ones like this one and Juno that bring across Sabrina's more cheeky sense of humor with sexuality to the forefront, and I think this is where she excels, because Juno and Bedkym are the two best songs on here easily. I think the closing track, Don't Smile, is also a pretty nice way to end the album. But there are some negatives to this album as well, some that I just don't care for as much. I'm not going to call Espresso a bad song by any means. In fact, I would say it's a pretty solid hit this year, just not among my favorite hits of the year, and I do think it's gotten a little annoying to me with time. I also think songs like Slim Pickens and Dumb and Poetic are just a little too short for me to leave much of an impact. And Good Graces, while it has an interesting idea going on in it, I don't think it's explored as well as it could have, and the lyrics are a little underwritten to me. Same goes for Lida Girls as well. But overall, I'd say this album is pretty good. I don't think it's anything particularly remarkable for the pop scene, but I do think it is probably the best thing that Sabrina Carpenter has come out with. And for that reason, I'll give it a solid 3 out of 5 stars. Next up is the newest album from Rain City Drive called Things Are Different Now. And man, if there's any band where I've been so impressed by their growth, it is this band. They were originally known as Slaves when Johnny Craig was part of the band. And of course, if you know anything about Johnny Craig, you know that he is a bit of a problematic person in the hardcore/metal adjacent scene, so it was no surprise when he left that band behind. It was actually, I think, a pretty smart move for the band to just entirely rebrand and change their name because of how much Slaves was associated with Johnny Craig. And while I was no big fan of the first album under their new name, in fact, I considered it to be one of the worst albums under the year it was released, their second album under their name was far, far, far better. I think their self-titled was excellent, and it showed them rebranding themselves into a much better version of sort of pop rock, I would say. And I think this album is sort of their defining sound to probably its best extent yet. They really embrace what worked for them on their self-titled and push it forward in some really excellent ways. I think this album is one of the best of the pop rock genre I have heard this year. It just dedicates to the style so well, and because of that, you can't help but have a fun time while you're listening to it, and there are so many choruses on here that are going to get you singing along right away. While a song like Wish You the Best, for the example, might have some pretty cliched lyrical turns in it. It is still a very catchy song that I can't deny I had a great time with. Concrete Closure has some pretty clever wordplay as well, talking about this idea of trying to find closure in the midst of a breakup and using puns with concrete and cement to sort of bring that across, and I think it's sort of fun in terms of how it delivers it. There are some places where the album can get a little existential as well. For an example, in the song Disarm the Hourglass, the band talks about the idea of trying to take hold of the time you have while you have it and making the most of it. And I like the urgency that the song has. Definitely one of the most urgent feeling on the album. Aware has just a superb chorus, maybe the most beautiful on the album, and is probably my favorite on this release just for how well done it is structurally and how it pursues what it's going for. Never Bloom is also just a really good single, and while it repeats the title of the song maybe a little too much, I still think it works in terms of what the song is trying to accomplish. There aren't that many negatives to this album, not many moments that I dislike. I think that, for an example, Over Me is a little cliched and maybe doesn't work as well as I would want it to. And Elusive Dream, while I do like the idea of what that song is doing, it doesn't work as well as I would want it to. But there's still plenty of highlights on here, including Medicate Me, which features Rory of Dayseeker, who is a perfect pairing for this band. This is a really great release, and I was pleasantly surprised with how much I liked it. I mean, I really enjoyed this. Solid 4 out of 5 stars. Check this one out if you like pop rock, because I think it does a good job at exploring both of those genres, probably better than a lot of bands who have attempted it this year. Next up is the album What I'll Leave Behind by the metalcore band Void of Vision. And man, talk about a really well done metalcore album that doesn't overstay its welcome and instead leaves a defining impact in only about a 30-minute runtime. This is a perfect release to listen to in October. I think this album has really interesting horror themes in it, especially in the musicality. It just sounds like a horror landscape in a lot of places. The opening song Oblivion immediately establishes this vibe with just a booming guitar riff and some gut-piercing screams that work very well, but also a chorus with some beautiful cleans that sort of originally came out of nowhere, but work very well on this album. And this lead singer's cleans, I mean, throughout this album are just really well done. He has a really unique voice, and I think it brings across some real heavy emotion to this album that makes it feel earned. Blood for Blood, though, is a song without any clean vocals, and it is a brutal assault that works very well. This one is fun, and while what it does is maybe a little basic, it still works in terms of what the song is delivering. I think really the second half of this album is where it picks up and does some really incredible stuff. I really like Gamma Knife, for an example. I think this one is probably my favorite on the album, as it seems to portray someone who is losing the fight to addiction, and it's just a really tragic listen from that perspective, especially in the chorus, which is just heart-wrenching and beautiful, asking someone to carry on for them even when they can't in the midst of their addictive spirals. It's a very powerful listen that I think is one of my favorite songs of the year. And the album continues on a strong streak after this with the song Empty. While this one feels like a sort of metalcore version of Linkin Park in a way, the chorus especially gives me those Linkin Park vibes. And then the album ends off with Decades, which is just another really good assault of the senses that I love, and Angel of Darkness, which has more of a pop metal flair to it and almost is danceable in a way, and I really like what it does and how it ends off the album. There's not much to say negatively about this album, I don't think. I really enjoyed what it did in terms of creating its oppressive atmosphere. It has a lot of good synth work in it as well. If I were to pinpoint moments I don't like on the album, I guess maybe one of them would be Neurotic. This reminds me of a bit of a weaker version of something that Thornhill would have done on their sophomore album from a couple years ago. Just not pursued nearly as well. I thought it was a little cheesy. And Ultimately, songs like Midnight Sweat and Beautiful Things are a little too short for me to really remember them. When you put all this album together, it creates a really strong listening experience that made me really excited to see what this band does next, because this is still a relatively new group, and it's just exciting to see how many new groups are really blowing up and blossoming in the metalcore landscape. It's very encouraging for where we're going in the future. Solid 4 out of 5 stars, definitely a great album that you should check out. Next up is an album that I'll admit I only checked out of morbid curiosity, and that was the newest Katy Perry release, 143, and I sort of regret my decision to check this out, but at the same time, it was sort of interesting to see her create something where she was trying to replicate her old sound and mostly it rang hollow. I'll be honest, I've never been the biggest fan of Katy Perry. I never really saw her hype even at her peak. She is not one of the more interesting pop artists, I don't think. For those that are saying that this is like one of the worst pop albums released this year, in some ways I can see why they'd say that, but in others, like, you could do worse than this, I think. I don't think it's as truly abhorrent as some people are saying. I think it's just more in line with what we've come to expect from Katy Perry. And if you're calling this album worse than Witness, I think you're a little bit delusional. That's not to say there aren't some bad moments on here that really make me cringe, because there are, including one that will be one of the worst songs of the year for me for sure, with Gimme Gimme with 21 Savage. Just some truly embarrassing lyrics and embarrassing moments with just bottom of the barrel bad production from Dr. Luke, which, good job Katy Perry for working with someone like Dr. Luke, who has been a proven scumbag for many reasons. Woman's World was the lead single of this album, and I don't know, I think a lot of people were maybe a little harsher on this one than they needed to be, but I also understand that it just feels like faux feminism, and it doesn't really pursue it in any interesting way, and the music video makes it ring even less true in terms of it actually being a feminist message. Is it one at all? I don't know. It could be satirical. Gorgeous with Kim Petras. I don't mind the chorus of this one so much, and the trap beat isn't actually terrible on this one, but otherwise it doesn't really work in terms of it creating a dark landscape. It doesn't feel particularly dark. It feels like a hollow shell of dark pop. There are some okay moments on here, like Lifetimes, for an example, wasn't too bad and has some faux EDM inspiration in it that I don't mind. Probably the best song on here is Artificial, and a lot of that has to do with Jid's feature. He just puts more effort into the song than it really deserved, I think, but he does well, and I do think Katy Perry sounds like she's trying a little bit better on this song as well. Wonder is an okay-ish closer, but I think it's only nice because of the novelty that it's dedicated to her daughter and her husband. Nirvana does nothing for me, as does All the Love and Truth. There's just so much cheese on here as well. I'm His, He's Mine is a prime example of this. Even though Doechii is trying her best with the material she's given here, the lyrics still can't come across as anything other than poorly written. And that's how the rest of this album fares. Yeah, this is pretty bad. I'm not going to say that it's like just one of the most abysmal pop releases I've ever heard, because I think that would be a little hyperbolic, but it is still pretty bad. I won't deny that. It is one of my least favorite albums of this year, for sure, but I do still think that some people are being maybe a little over the top, but at the same time, I can sort of understand why. 2 out of 5 stars for me. Next up was one of my most anticipated albums of this year, the newest from Marianas Trench, Haven. It's always so exciting when this band comes out with new releases, ever since I got into them with Phantoms back in 2019, and I've gotten back into their back-end catalog, which I'm still going through. I find them to be just a really just ingenious pop rock band. And to call them pop rock is a little dismissive of just how good they are, I think. I think they have a lot more epic tendencies than the pop rock label gives them. And this album is really no different. It in fact brings back the theatricality in a way that Phantoms didn't really have, although I think it was a purposeful choice for Phantoms to not have the theatricality. There was a reason they didn't do it on that album. Much like their other albums, this one does follow a concept, and this time the concept is more of a broad one in that it is talking about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey theory, and that every story generally can be fit into one typical hero's journey that they go on. It includes things like, for an example, a call to action, meeting the mentor, the hero facing their enemy, the hero having doubts, all that sort of stuff. This album pursues all 13 points of the character's journey in 13 separate songs. And I think it's a pretty cool idea to do this, and continues Marianas Trench's theme of being a story-driven band. And I like that the story here is actually about the lead singer himself. It is actually about his own journey, Josh Ramsey's own journey with having a child being born in his life and what that has meant for him, as well as the journey he's been on with the band Marianas Trench. A Normal Life begins off this album in an excellent way, and I really love this one. I thought this was a great way to lead off the album, and it was a lead single for the album, which was very fitting. This one serves as the call to action for the album, talking about the main character, aka Josh, having a desire for living something more than a normal life, for wanting to move out into the world and do more with it. And I like the music gives this the appropriate weight it deserves, with a lot of orchestral elements and classic 80s sounding guitar work that is just superbly executed. Lightning and Thunder is more of what you would consider a typical pop rock fare, but I do really like the sort of nostalgic feeling that this song has in terms of Josh looking back not only on his journey with the band Marianas Trench themselves and how far they've gone, but also the fact that his wife has a child now, and that he is a father, and that things will never be the same as they were before, but this is only the beginning of his new journey. Down to You is super catchy. I love the fast-paced drum work on this one and the urgency that it has. Into the Storm feels absolutely bigger than life as we're starting to get into the rising action of the album, and maybe Josh having some doubts about whether he can pursue the family life in terms of him having to deal with his band as well, and it all feels very stressful, which is purposeful, I think. Ancient History is a pretty interesting one in that it is talking about a past love that Josh had, but with him acknowledging that, yeah, that love, he'll always have that past relationship to look back on, but he does need to move forward. And I like the saxophone in it, although I wish the saxophone had been incorporated a little bit more into the song. It's a really good building up of tension in the album before we get into Worlds Collide, which is the absolute climax of the album, and man, this song is just incredible. Josh just shows off his vocal chops here, and deservedly so. It creates a moment that is absolutely huge and where you feel the weight of everything piling on. And the resolution of it is incredibly powerful. And then we just get a really great ending to the album. Remember Me By is very funky, 80s sounding, and I love this one. And then we get, man, the mind-blowing closer, Haven, the title track. It's amazing that a band can make a song like this. You don't hear songs like this every day, with just it resolving every arc in the album in a very strong way, and also referencing previous works of theirs, including musical cues from previous songs, repeating melodies and things like that. It leaves you off just feeling impacted by this album, and leaves you wanting to come back to it again just to experience the journey all over. I absolutely love what this closing track does. It could well be my favorite song of the year. It is just so good in what it does, and I don't think any other song this year has impressed me as much as this one did. I suppose Nights Like These feels like sort of a cliched song about remembering and being nostalgic about times that you've left behind. I've heard songs like this before, so this one didn't really leave much of a mark on me, and I do think that I'm Not Getting Better is one that I just didn't remember all that much, or didn't feel much about. But overall, I mean, man, this album was great. I love what Marianas Trench did here. They have started a new journey now, since they have effectively ended the Astoria story arc with Phantoms, and now they're moving on to something new, and I, for one, am very excited to see where they go forward after this. But for now, this album I'll be returning to a lot more this year. It is just so much fun. Definitely one of my top 10 releases of the year so far. Very strong 4 out of 5 stars. could become a 4.5 out of 5 in the future. I just absolutely love this. And finally, we end off with another sort of metalcore adjacent release, although I wouldn't call this strictly metalcore. I'd say it's more alternative metal, and that is Future Palace's newest album, Distortion. This is a female-fronted metalcore band. I really like the lead singer's voice. I think Maria Lessing is a really interesting vocalist. She sort of reminds me of the lead vocalist for Icon for Hire, Ariel Bloom, and in fact, this album, it just couldn't escape my mind how much this album felt like if Icon for Hire were a bit more of a heavy band and actually did their rapping sound a little better than they do now. You will find as I talk about this album that I do like the songs more that have not as much rapping, but that is more my personal preference. And the fact that I do like the songs that incorporate rapping is a bit of a testament to this album, because I do tend to find rapping to be a bit awkward in the metalcore scene. I think it does a good job at sort of doing its overarching theme of talking about different types of mental health or inner struggles that people have. This album is definitely made for a Gen Z audience more than a lot of metalcore albums are. This is the case in terms of its structure. I think there are some songs on here that were built to have success on the TikTok platform, and I don't say that as a negative here necessarily, but there are also some songs that take some really interesting risks on here. I think the album begins off really well with its 2 lead singles. Uncontrolled was my favorite of the 2 lead singles. I really liked what this one did in terms of its musicality. I thought it did really well with its very fun riff, definitely one of the most memorable riffs of the year, and the chorus is just undeniably catchy. Malthus is bigger than life, and the breakdown in it is wild and sort of out of nowhere, but works very well in context of the song. And then we start to get into a bit more of the risky songs, with, for an example, The Echoes of Disparity, which is the most political that Future Palace has gotten yet, and probably one of the most political songs I've heard in the metalcore, especially mainstream metalcore landscape, as it talks about reproductive rights in a way that is pretty fiery and in absolute rage, and it fittingly features Charlie Rolfe, the lead vocalist of As Everything Unfolds. While I would have liked to have heard her clean vocals a little more, because that's really what I like Charlie for a lot, her bringing her guttural screams to this was a really nice cherry on top of a really well done song that I think brings across a lot of well-earned fury. Dream State is probably the catchiest on the album in terms of the chorus that it has. It's gonna be locked in your head for ages to come, and I like that it talks about anxiety in a pretty straightforward way, although some might complain that the lyrics are a little too straightforward in terms that they don't leave much to the imagination and just state outright what's going on. But in terms of this song, it works. Decorabia is easily my favorite on the album and will probably be in my top 50 favorite songs of the year, because this one is just addicting. The danceable groove in it is so much fun. This one brings to mind Spirit Box in a way, especially Spirit Box's last EP and what they were doing with the more danceable songs. In Too Deep and Rays of Light are a great back-to-back punch. I think I like Rays of Light maybe a little bit better, but both of them work well in terms of what they are discussing. Now, this album is not entirely perfect. I do think that the rap singing that can go on can get a little bit tiresome, especially in the second half of the album. It starts to become noticeable, especially with songs like A Fool on a Devil's Rain, and they take what they want, just not really executing it as well as they could. And I also did say that this album has a bit of a problem with being maybe a little bit too straightforward in the lyrics. I do think this is a pretty solid metalcore release, and I liked it better than their previous album Run, which I did think was a little bit cliched in terms of metalcore, but this one pushes their sound forward in a way that I think works for them, and actually shows them bringing in elements of pop and rap in a way that works better than a lot of bands like them who have tried it. Solid 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. And that ends this episode of Quick Album Reviews. Let me know what your thoughts were on any of these albums if you've heard them. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you on the next video.